Dr. Tiffany Vora, I'm a big fan, you know that. Thank you so much for coming to Australia, for having this conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you, as it always is. Fascinated by your work. Let's start by, what do you find the most fascinating? I know that's a very difficult question, but it will lead us into other conversation. What do you find the most fascinating about your work?
I think the thing that's most fascinating for me today is that we're at this really unusual moment in history. In fact, I might say a unique moment in history, where because of the way our exponential technologies have been developing at the same time as our biotechnologies are developing, now we're coming to a place where the boundaries between the living and the non-living world are starting to break down in really exciting ways. So I used to always hear from people, they say, oh, you're a scientist, that has nothing to do with what I do. I'm a banker, I'm a construction worker, I'm these various things. And whenever I hear somebody say that, I always want to say, how can you think biology has nothing to do with you? You have a body, you eat food, you love people who have bodies and eat foods. And I think what's interesting now is these technologies have gotten so powerful in the background, in that deceptive area of the curve where most folks aren't looking. But I really think that easily in the next 5 to 10 years, and especially on longer timescales, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, the biotechnology revolution that's happening right now is absolutely going to affect our lived experiences inside our bodies, outside our bodies, and how we build the world around us.
I love that, and I love how you opened with, has been this divergent concept between science and life, and I think that's one of the hardest things that happens when you go through school, and it's this, let's see how it all fits together. But you're absolutely correct. Everything from the sun to synthesis to everything that happens is very much affecting each and every one of us. So it is an interesting concept, because it's like, I don't like science. Whereas in fact our world is full of it, and you make it sound absolutely fascinating. So very much interested in how you adapt your theories around biology to every living thing, every experience that we have. And I know that you've got a book, that you're working on a book that encompasses all of that. Can you share some of that expertise with us?
Sure. So the book is called Bio-Inspired, and it's a way to look at the natural world around us, which has had, for life on Earth, let's call it 4 billion years of time to innovate and to try a whole bunch of different strategies. And so if we can take advantage of life's 4 billion years of evolution, for us, that's standing on the shoulders of giants in really exciting ways, not just for learning about behavior, but also for all of the innovations that we're trying to bring into the world about materials and healthcare and all these various things. A lot of times biology has actually already solved the problem. We just have to have our eyes open and have the humility to look around us and to say, what can we learn from these various things? So there are really classic examples of this. So you probably know Velcro, for example, is based on that burrs, right, that you get when you walk through a field and all those horrible things stick to your pants and your socks. Well, some really clever engineer had the idea, why don't I just use the same system on purpose, and we can use that to hold our clothes together. And plants, a particular amazing place of this type of diversity. Bacteria do the same thing. And now, thanks to a lot of the science that's been happening and the algorithms and just plain old-fashioned hard work by human scientists, now we know so much more about the building blocks of life around us that now we're empowered to put these together in new ways. So I think about, for the book, not just about what are the actual lessons that we can see from the world around us, but at a meta level, what can we learn from how biologists look at the world around us to inform us as leaders, to think about our bias, to do observations, to run experiments, to make sure we're not only talking to people who agree with us. Scientists really don't agree with each other. And it's important to have that community of thinkers, and to really slow down and to give ourselves permission to think big. These are things that we don't do in today's corporate world in particular, where it's just bang, 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 results, results, results. Every time I hear someone say, oh, let's throw it against the wall, I'm like, no, 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 that's not an experiment. The only failed experiment is an experiment that tells you nothing. Not that gives you the answer you didn't want. And so there's all of these insights that I was taught as a scientist, and now as I've gone through my career and transitioned more into technology analysis, there's just so much we can learn from the natural world. We just have to adopt that mindset.
How did that happen for you? Because your tagline, we talk about it all the time, biology is technology. How did that transition, how did that integration happen for you?
I've had a really strange career trajectory. So I was trained to be a research scientist, in fact, a university research scientist. So when I was in university, and then as I went through my PhD program, I expected to be a university professor and to run a research lab. That was the one job I trained for. But as it turns out, there aren't actually that many of those jobs available, and there's a whole lot of cultural reasons and work-life balance reasons that people might choose to step out of that pipeline. So for me, I was a university professor for a bit at the American University in Cairo, and when I came back to the United States, I taught at Stanford for a while, which was also great. But I realized as well that the way we talk about our science, the way we tell the story of our science today and in the future, is something that actually scientists are not usually trained to do. So I started a science communication company figuring out how to bridge this gap. How do we make it better for scientists to talk to other scientists, and perhaps more importantly, scientists to talk to non-scientists, because that's where the world is going. And frankly, over the last 2.5 years, if the pandemic has shown us only one thing, it's the importance of communication between scientists or the medical field and everybody else. Policymakers, individual citizens, communities, all of these things are really important. So I started looking at that more carefully, and that's what brought me to Singularity University and to this thought leadership ecosystem all over the world, where how do we drill down into an idea in a way that's really accessible to people and gets them to see, oh my gosh, this actually applies to me, and I need to imagine my future adding this little piece to it. And for me, that little piece is scientific advancement in biotechnology.
Which is what we found through working those workshops together, is that integration, and how it gives people that aha moment that if we do look to biology and then we integrate the technology, almost everything is possible if we throw the right mindset at it. In a lot of our discussions, ethics has come up. You talk about CRISPR. We talk about the helix, the DNA, how we can cut into that. How are you finding the integration of an ethical perspective? You're a wife, you're a mother, you're a human first. I know that very much about you. How do you integrate all those ethical considerations, conversations into that work?
So I think for me on a personal level, I try to take kind of a science fiction perspective. I'm also a writer, including a fiction writer, and so I try to picture what will the world actually look like? What will my life, not just some vague idea of the future, but what will my life actually look like in a future where I could prevent genetic disease, right? Whether it's somatically, like using that type of thing to not just treat my cancer, but to make sure my cancer never happens in the first place. That's a really different world. Or the longevity science that we're starting to see today, really taking traction and really getting some forward momentum. What would it look like for me to be 120 years old and to feel essentially the way I feel today? I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but by putting myself into that mindset now, I'm starting to think about the decisions that I can take today that are laying the foundation for me to skate to that puck, to mix all of my metaphors at the same time. And especially in a moment in history where we're facing some really important challenges, right? So you talked about CRISPR and ethics. Folks since the 1970s, in particular parts of the world, like for example in Europe, have felt really strongly that genetically modifying organisms is somehow wrong. And a lot of the times they say, oh, it's unnatural. Well, arsenic is natural, it's not good for you. So that argument to me is a non-argument. But also just this idea that, we're putting something in our bodies that really matters. So when I start thinking about what are the ethics of using gene editing like CRISPR or even standard genetic modification techniques to make sure we have food to eat as climate change is massively impacting our food security and distribution and people's ability to access healthy food, I don't know what we're talking about at this point. So there's a piece where we have to zoom in to the particulars and the feelings, and then there's a piece where we have to be able to zoom out to see the bigger picture. And the piece that I know you and I have talked about a few times is I often think when I'm thinking about health, when I'm thinking about food, I'm thinking about these various technologies. Yes, I agree, we have to have these really important conversations. But then I also force myself to picture a time 50 years from now where my son looks me in the face and says, you held this technology in your hands and you were afraid to use it. And now look where we are. Look at how much suffering there was. So I'm really interested in understanding what's the path and what are the many paths between a positive, abundant 50-year future and where we stand today. Where are the speed bumps? Where are the decision points? Where are the branch points? And by backcasting, really thinking about what are the most important decisions we have to make when, so that we can get to that future, that we can agree that we want for as many people as possible.
Yeah, I love that. And I also remember the conversation that we had around, how do you view now an IVF child? Is that IVF child unnatural? Should that IVF child not exist? Or is that IVF child a gift to the parents, that have been able to experience that child?
Yeah, this idea of the zeitgeist and culture, it doesn't just happen, we build it. So when I'm talking to folks who are working on a new technology, I always say to them, while you're doing the technological development and getting ready to bring your product to market, make sure the market is actually going to want what you're selling. And there are some frameworks we can use to really figure out what's the problem you're solving. It worries me when people lead with the solution instead of leading with the problem. And so that's where we can really drill down and agree or try to get some sort of momentum around agreement so that folks can say, yeah, you know what, I actually do want food, fresh vegetables in 20 years when global warming, everything is 3 degrees C hotter. How am I going to get there from here? And setting that stage, I think, is important.
Not to mention how many times we've planted something in the same soil and lost all the nutrients. What would be the biggest challenge that you would love to solve?
What would be the biggest challenge that I would love to solve?
Small question.
I know, gosh, and one I'm totally prepared for. So I think for me, one of the things that I think about the most is what are we teaching our children today in order to prepare them for the world that they're going to be growing into. And for me, that's a moving target because I'm also thinking not just about the challenges like climate change, but I'm thinking about opportunities like much longer, healthier human lives. So if I believe, for example, which I do, that AI and robotics are going to be giving superpowers to humans in the sense that a lot of the routine kind of low input work that we've been doing for so long is going to be taken up for us by the machines, that frees us up to be using our creativity, our resilience, our collaborative skills, all these things in a different way. I have an 11-year-old son. How am I teaching him that? What do I need to do for that? So our family is, my son has 2 scientist parents. Our house is full of microscopes and 3D printers and drones and all this stuff. And I feel like I'm not trying to teach him skills so much as mindset. I feel like this, not only will the skills come, but they're a moving target. And I actually have no idea what job my son is going to have in 30 years because a lot of these jobs haven't been invented yet. So that is a problem that I would love to solve. And I think about it as well, not just in terms of the technological landscape, but also the physical landscape that we'll be inhabiting 30 years in the future. There's so much uncertainty about what climate change is actually going to look like, but it's my job to be making sure that all the people I work with and my child in particular are going to be functional. I'm trying to hit a target I can't even see. And I'd love to solve that problem.
I think that's amazing, and I wish you every success in solving that problem, and I'll do anything I can to help you do that as well. It's very interesting also when you look at that. Science is a big picture. We've talked about zooming out, zooming in on science, but particularly what I heard then also was this effect that leadership should be looking towards science, biology. Everything should be integrated. Like they're just, for me, should's not a great word. I don't like using it, but the convergence of everything, all the knowledge that we know, will come together hopefully to help us solve all these big problems. I know you do a lot of work in leadership. Can you just share a bit of that with us as well?
Sure. So I like to think a lot about the places that leaders can look to for various types of inspiration. And what works for you and is inspiring for you might not be inspiring for me, and vice versa. So I think if we come at this from a place of real humility, right? What are the various sources that we can look to. And in an increasingly connected world, we have access to many more experiments, traditions, cultures, ways of thinking, these various things. But to me, it's all about humility. So even if I pick up a piece of inspiration from someone, my next question in my brain always is, what's the experiment I can do to figure out if this is actually going to work for me, right? And now I'm biased, right? I was trained as an experimental scientist, so my brain always immediately goes to the experiment. But look at how kids learn. Kids run experiments all the time. It's how they learn about the world around them. And at least at some level, children have that naive humility to just go in and do whatever it takes to solve the problem. And I think about that a lot for leadership. Nature also does whatever it takes to solve the problem. No matter how messy or nasty or non-optimal or weird or any of these things, nature's like solving the problem. That's how evolution works. And that's what I'd really like to take for my leadership journey as well.
I think that's spectacular. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, your expertise. Thanks for coming to Australia. It's been remarkable having you here. Wish you could stay for longer.
Well, you'll just have to bring us back.
I will, indeed. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina.